Previously on Dawid Does Tech Stuff. It's not firing up with the 1070 in it either. Oh no! I killed it. The 3080 Ti was too much for it and the power supply just committed harakiri. Which brings me to today's video where I got my hands on a beefier power supply for the MSI system all the way from Japan so that I can do everything in my power to get that 3080 Ti to run terribly in this MSI system, even if it costs me my fingers. But before that, it's time for a word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Be Quiet and their Pure Loop AIOs. Now, it goes without saying that the Pure Loop AIOs are easy to mount, come in a variety of sizes, and with its unique pump design is surprisingly quiet for an AIO. But what I like most about these AIOs is their minimalist aesthetic. I think they look real sexy with that brushed metal faceplate and that diffused white LED. And considering that you don't have to pay a ridiculous RGB tax on these, they are surprisingly affordable. And they have a fill port on an AIO, which I think is really cool. So if you like the look of these, check out the Pure Loop AIOs using the link in my description below. And thank you again, Be Quiet, for sponsoring today's video. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, Dawid, that is just a 600 watt power supply, which really is not a great pairing for an RTX 3080 Ti. But the main reason I got it is because I really like triggering Garys. So for the type of person that gets offended by this power supply choice, look at it! Look at it! No, actually the real reason is this was just the best option I could get. FSP does make an 850 watt flex power supply, but it's got the same problem that I think is going to be the issue for the Silverstone power supply that we'll discuss in a little bit, and it's longer than the power supply that came in the MSI system, and I didn't want to risk it not fitting in the case. Now, another interesting thing about this Silverstone power supply is that it's got a Cybernetics Platinum rating, which may just sound like a Kirkland brand 80+ rating, but Cybernetics actually has a more comprehensive test suite that the power supply needs to pass in order to get the rating, so I actually think this is better than 80+. Okay, so let's have a closer look at the power supply we're going to use to torture an RTX 3080 Ti with. Wow, that is not super well packaged. Now, it comes with quite a standard Japanese power cord here with the little extraneous ground cable. Pull that off and... oh, it's so cute and little. Now on the back, we have a worryingly small fan. I think this is gonna just be inappropriately noisy, but we'll see how that goes. And then we've got a non-modular power supply. Now, the MSI system does actually have some proprietary connectors on the motherboard for power, but I did get an adapter off of Amazon, so we should still be able to use this power supply. Now, this power supply does have a 50 amp 12 volt rail on it, which I'm hoping will be able to handle a bottlenecked 3080 Ti, but we'll see how it goes. You know, we'll see what happens. All I hope is that it doesn't explode under any form of load so that we can like underclock and underpower the GPU in a way that it does work. But now that we've had a very brief look at this little power supply, let's drop it into the MSI system and just hope that when the previous power supply died, it didn't just take the whole system with it. Now, if you have a closer look at this motherboard, you can see that it looks like it's just a slightly extended standard ITX motherboard, which means that if the previous power supply did kill this motherboard, we may be able to just replace it. Like if you drop an ITX motherboard over it, you can see that the screw holes do actually line up for it. Oh yeah, don't you just love a nice proprietary connector? Now you can see here that the Silverstone power supply I bought is actually smaller than the one that's in here. Hopefully I can get it mounted decently. Do this. Okay, well, that's not ideal. Now, after evaluating various options, I think the ghettoist solution is going to be the best. I'm just going to kind of leave it resting like this, because with the PC the right way up, it's just going to be wedged down by that plate, which there's very little clearance, so it is actually going to kind of hold it in place. Yeah, why not? Let's sort the cables out and then see if the system runs. Which went well.
Oh, it's such a small hole. Please. Oh. Come on. Oh, that's just one.
Now, considering that we have the predictably inconvenient proprietary motherboard power, we're gonna need this adapter, which is a 24-pin to 10-pin cable, in order to get that Silverstone power supply to work in here. Okay, well, that all looks fine to me, so let's close it up and find out if that power supply took its family with it on its way out. I think it killed the whole system on its way out. Well, that's a shame. I'm pretty sure the actual core system in here has died. The next step is to replace it with a newer RTX motherboard. Now, I think if we can remove this hard drive cage, it'll make it a whole lot easier to get that motherboard out. Now, I do think that it is removable because I've already undone a couple of screws holding it in place, but it's not coming undone yet. So maybe there are a couple of more screws under here that we need to get out. Wait, so under this top panel, which I didn't even realize was removable, there's a hidden hot swappable SSD caddy? Who designed this case? Why did they hide two hot swappable hard drive caddies under the DVD drive that's hidden under the top panel? This is such a ridiculous PC, holy crap. Because of all of this proprietariness, this is definitely not going to be a clean transplant, but you know, you never know until you try. So after about 2 years of struggling, here is the slightly deformed RTX motherboard. You can have a closer look at all of the proprietary connectors. We've got the 10-pin over here. We've got some proprietary fan connectors over here. At least all of the SATA was standard. But here we've got a bunch of like front panel connectors and stuff. Now I quickly want to test this motherboard outside of the case with a known working power supply, just to make sure that it did actually suffer death by 3080 Ti. Because I don't see any obvious signs of motherboard failure like scorch marks around the power delivery or anything like that.
A few moments later.
No, it did. That's actually not the driest looking thermal paste. Okay, well, there's a big problem. MSI, you couldn't have made this harder, could you? Because of the fact that the CPU socket is oriented differently on this motherboard, and you can see that it's actually further away from the rear I/O. Because of those factors, it means that this cooler, it can't fit on there. Because even if you have less obstruction over here and you can actually get the cooler to mount, it actually overhangs the back of the motherboard. So it's not gonna work. So long story short, our options are getting more limited here. And I think our best bet is probably gonna be to use a motherboard with just like a standard cooler on it, something like this stock AMD cooler, which actually is lower profile than this cooler's high point. The problem is that this cooler is just going to be asphyxiated by the back of the GPU. So the temperatures are going to be horrendous in here, but I don't know what other options I have at this point. Would you look at that? At least the screw holes line up. So the PCIe bracket actually plugged in, which is good, although we do not have a whole lot of clearance. As you can see, my finger can barely fit between the bracket and the top of the fan. And not only that, but the RTX 3080 Ti Founders Edition card has a rear blowing fan, which is very possibly just going to be dumping a bunch of heat into the CPU cooler. So hopefully we don't cause some silicon fusion today, but let's reassemble the system and see how that goes. Okay, now this is some real Satan level design decision making here, because they take a standard connector, right? This connector is what a front panel connector looks like in a case like an NZXT one. So you'd think like, oh, that may actually fit. But what they've done is they've just shrunken it ever so slightly down from standard so that it looks like a standard connector, but it doesn't actually fit on anything useful. Now, the reason that this whole power button fiasco is so irritating is that once we have a graphics card in here, we're not just going to be able to screwdriver savage power on the system because there's a graphics card in the way. Now, what I've done in order to get around MSI's evil ways is I just stole a power button from a different case so that I can position this somewhere more easily accessible inside this pre-built case. I don't know, I feel like that isn't looking too bad. So yeah, let's just drop the graphics card back in here and then test it, I guess. Hey, would you look at that? The CPU cooler actually has a bit of room to breathe. That's enough, right? Nice, that sounds good. You can see things are spinning in there. Yay, success! Oh, it shut down again. Well, the Battlefield 5 menus are clearly just way too much for these flex power supplies, but considering that we've got some motherboard RGBs still going, I think that the power supply didn't die this time, so that's a good start. Okay, nice. There we go. It's not dead this time, which is a genuine improvement over the previous configuration. So now we can start playing around with the power limits on that GPU, and then maybe we can get it to a point where it can run Battlefield 5's menus, which really would be the dream. That power supply is really annoyingly loud. So all I'm gonna do here is take the power limit slider and just do that with it. I mean, I could, if I wasn't a complete savage, undervolt the GPU, but let's see if this works and then we'll take it from there. So as you can see, it is drawing a whole lot less power. Oh. Come on! It's crashed again! What the hell? Okay, well, let's just do that. Okay, there we go. It's drawing 110 watts now. Like, the power supply has to be able to handle this, right? Okay, well, at 110 watts, the system's not crashed yet, so that's good. That's a step in the right direction. Our RTX 3080 Ti is drawing just 110-ish watts, and we're getting 210 megahertz of core frequency going. But we're still getting about 60 frames per second in Battlefield 5, which, interestingly enough, Battlefield 5 is actually performing worse now than it did with the 1070. But that's not the point of this video. We've got a bigger graphics card name number in the system. That's the only thing we care about. And the system's actually running. So I think what I'm gonna do now is slowly pull up that slider in MSI Afterburner until the PC crashes. Oh, that's made a considerable performance difference, and it's not increased our power draw that much. So that's interesting. Going from 110-ish to 140-ish has given us more than double the FPS. Okay, so the power draw to performance metric of the RTX 3080 Ti is definitely not a linear graph. And I think now it's actually running better than it did on the 1070, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so that's made quite a big difference to our power draw figure, but
our frame rate's it's a little bit better. It's not much better though.
Now clearly the reason we're not getting more performance is because that 5300G is a bottleneck here. I'm not quite sure why it's drawing so little power in this situation, but either way, let's replace the CPU in there and see if we can get more performance out of the system. Holy, that is glued on there. Oh, whoa. Oh, there we go. Wow, that thermal paste is dry as hell. That is definitely one of the reasons the temperatures were struggling even with a low power draw. That all makes sense now. Now, even with that new CPU in there and just a 58% power draw limit on the RTX 3080 Ti, we've had to bump up the resolution from 1080p to 4K just so that we don't run into a CPU bottleneck. But now that we are at 4K Ultra settings, we're still getting about 110 frames per second, and it's running well. Everything seems to be okay. So let's bump up the power draw a little bit and see how it goes. Oh yeah, we're actually already getting to a point again at 4K where the 3600 is a bottleneck. So that's, wow, that is crazy. The 3080 Ti, even when heavily kneecapped, is still a complete monster where the power supply is gonna tap out. So let's see when we hit that. Oof, that CPU is not having a good time anymore. Oh, there's someone with me. Oh, there we go. 75% is just too much for it at this point.
So at the end of the day, I think the reason why flex power supplies crumble neath the mighty tread of an RTX 3080 Ti is because the ones that I've found only have a single PCIe power cable that splits off to dual 8-pins, making it easy for the graphics card to overdraw the cable and lead to power supply death. Which brings me to the end of the video. Bye!